John F. Kennedy is one of the most beloved presidents in modern American history. He captured the imagination of the nation and became a symbol of its youth and idealism. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh challenges a Kennedy legend in his new book, The Dark Side of Camelot. It has been the subject of great controversy and debate, and I am pleased to have him on this program on the eve of a broadcast on ABC News largely about Seymour Hersh's reporting. Welcome to the broadcast.
Glad to be here. I think.
Well, we'll find out, won't we? What is it? What is going on here? Maryland was the least of it by Tom Powers, a review. Here is Gary Wills, another Pulitzer Prize winner, saying very, very tough things about you. Hersh is JFK. Time magazine cover story. Seymour takes on Camelot, but how believable is his new book? What's going on?
I think I touched a nerve, I guess. You know, I didn't do anything different on this book than I have in writing about My Lai. You know, you find people, you interview them, get them on the record, corroborate what they say, make sure they are what they say, put it down reasonably accurately. You know how we are. We try the best we can, and put it in some sort of halfway readable form, depending on anybody's taste. And for My Lai and for writing about the CIA, I get hosannas and prizes. And here I'm in the middle of a storm. Look, it sells books, Charlie, so that's okay, but I don't like it. I think that if I'm right about this, then a generation or two generations of journalists and historians are wrong. And maybe that's what it is. Maybe it's just sort of tilting at a windmill.
They're wrong and you're right on what specific or what major point?
That the dark may have been more important than the other side of it. You know, there are two sides, and by the way, this is not described as, you know, a completely balanced version of John F. Kennedy's presidency. It's called The Dark Side, you know. I mean, maybe I should have put it in a plain wrapper or something. But there's no false advertising, and there are wonderful moments. You know, this is a guy who made a moral stand on civil rights, and we can talk about the others, space to the moon, leadership, the notion of vigor. Yeah, we had 8 years of Eisenhower, and there was something titillating about a virile president, you know, a president who was a man. And he was so beautiful. And
handsome.
Oh, yeah. Well, he was more than handsome. He was really... This book could be subtitled The Power of Beauty. He was really... one of his friends, Chuck Spaulding, said to me, when he came into a room, the temperature went up 150 degrees. He wowed him. It wasn't the men, Charlie. He wowed... It wasn't the woman. He wowed the men. I mean, the McNamaras and the McGeorge Bundys, they were smitten with this guy.
He liked men better than women.
No, they just, the man, he was a man's man. Yeah, he might have. If you mean that more profoundly,
no, I don't
sure.
mean it sexually. I mean in
no,
terms
more
of
profound. Oh, I don't think there's any question. He could relate to men in a much more direct way. But with terrible consequences, I think. I don't think he got the best of his men.
Here is the point. After 5 years of research and this book and all the interviews, you come away with the conclusion that whatever his recklessness about his personal conduct, whatever he did that showed great risk, that did not say good things about him or would not have said good things about a president of the United States, despite all that, you think, or because of that, he put the country at risk, he made bad policies, he did what?
I think you could say the reason you get into the sex, besides the fact that these Secret Service guys who I interviewed had the guts to go on the record, putting me in a dilemma. If they're going to go on the record, I have to go on the record. And that changes the ballgame. And I'm into a real tough situation then, writing about somebody's personal life. I don't do it. And the argument about writing about his personal life in this book is I think it's a continuum. I think there was a certain recklessness in John F. Kennedy, an acute recklessness, sort of a... I can't put it, you know, there was a great killer in Chicago, a serial killer. I was a kid reporter in Chicago named Bill Hirons. Used to murder people, and he'd write with lipstick on the mirror, "Stop me before I kill again." This guy was really out there sexually. And there was a risk there, and I see it in a lot of the policy.
A risk to the fact that somebody might blackmail him? A risk to what?
Of course, there was a per se risk that he wasn't taking care of himself. He is the President of the United States. And he's having liaison with women that the Secret Service don't know about, they can't protect, they're not looking at, they're not going through their purses, they don't know who's with him. That's one issue. The other risk, concomitant with that, is the risk of exposing himself, in the case of Judy Campbell Exner, the woman with whom he had an affair who was close to the organized crime people. The risk of blackmail, an obvious risk, but having said those, there also is, you just can't cap it. When part of your personality is one way, it's got to show off another way. In the missile crisis, I argue, he put us all at risk, perhaps very much needlessly. I think that he understood better than most how much his obsession with Fidel Castro led us into the missile crisis. I think he was very reckless.
But as soon as you say that, historian after historian who looks at the facts, listens to the tapes that are there available now, comes to this conclusion: he performed well under pressure in that crisis. Not what created the crisis in the first place, but resolving the crisis.
Depends on what you mean by
and no sex got in the way, nothing else got in the way, and here was a guy
but Charlie, we're not
operating
talking
at the
sex
center
there.
of the Oval Office with great...
We're not talking about sex at that moment. And by the way, during the week of the missile crisis, that he performed well. I mean, Charlie, if he's not up to snuff there, we're in real trouble.
Okay, but the point is...
No, let me finish the point.
Okay.
It's not that week that I'm so interested in, although it's a great week and it's documented well in the Kennedy tapes, the new book. Jack Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, when his escutcheon was stained, he was tarnished by the Bay of Pigs. He lost the Bay of Pigs. He had never lost anything before. And I write in this book that one aspect of the Bay of Pigs invasion was the assassination of Castro that was supposed to take place with the help of organized crime. There's a strong case for that, and it's on the record in some cases, most of the cases here. After that, he waits a few months, and then in the fall of '61, he jacks up the CIA again through Bobby Kennedy, his little brother, and his protector and his mentor and what you will, his best friend and his prime minister, and his cleanup man, the guy with the shovel and pail, following the elephant. He then jacks up the CIA and says, I want him. Get that guy's body. I want him taken care of. No question he's talking about killing him. And they then jack up the assassination plots. They bring in more criminals. They start doing it again. They don't have many assets in Cuba. They're complaining. They're complaining a lot. What the hell does this have to do with national security? By it's an obsession at this point. That's the word that's used a lot of times in interviews with me. The president was obsessed. Mano a mano, who knows why. I mean, there was a lot of similarities between these two guys.
Okay, but hear me out after you. Go ahead, make your point.
All right, I'll get to it. He then jacks up, by early '62, the largest CIA station in the world is outside Miami. We're sending teams in all the time. We're planning. He sets up the Mongoose operation with Ed Lansdale, a former CIA guy, Air Force general. And they're plotting an invasion by October of 1962. All this planning in secret, known to Castro, known to Khrushchev. I think there's a very strong case, and most of the major historians now are beginning to look at more documents coming out from the Soviet side, not the American side, and concluding that Nikita Khrushchev puts the missiles into Cuba. Certainly one major reason was fear of what we were going to do to Castro. At the minimum, Jack Kennedy's continuing obsession with Castro gave Khrushchev the chance to try and get some sort of nuclear balance, or think he could. I mean, he's outgunned 3,000 to 250. And as McNamara says right away, what's the difference whether it's a missile in Cuba or a missile in a submarine? And by the way, in those tapes that were published, the Harvard tapes, the Kennedy tapes, and the first day of the crisis, Jack Kennedy says, I'm sorry I made all those speeches about how important this was. I should have said we don't care. Yeah. He was stuck with his own rhetoric.
He also said the New York Times should have printed the fact that he was planning an invasion. And they would have been better off if they printed it, right?
Well, that was earlier, sure. Yeah. But that's Monday Morning Quarterback.
Okay, but let me just stay with the idea. The point we're trying to get at here is your central conclusion, or one of your important conclusions, is that because of his recklessness, it affected the policies of the nation. Now, recklessness about sexual conduct influenced his decision-making? Recklessness?
You're missing a point.
Okay, that's what I'm trying to understand.
The kind of recklessness you saw in his sexual conduct, which is easy to see, the sort of pretty extreme recklessness. I mean, photographs of him with women being, distributed and stuff like that. I say that kind of recklessness you can't just cap.
Bottom line, was this for you, when you look at this man, a successful presidency? How would you grade the presidency, taking away for a second, but not forgetting, whatever condemnation we have of recklessness and character? On the face, looking at decisions, looking at what happened on his watch, a good president or not?
Not good.
Not good.
Oh, no.
And your principal indictment is what?
Let me keep on going on Cuba for one more minute. I know you want to move it along. He doesn't tell anybody about the deal.
No president tells everybody everything. Come on, you know much better than I do. That you don't sit there and say, you got some guys know something, and some people know something.
It was a crisis that may not have been a crisis. There's no sign, by the way, the Russians ever really planned to go to war. There may be something yet we still don't know about it.
Right.
He cuts a deal, and the one guy in the XCOM, that group, Ed Stevens, the one guy who advocated in the group, said out loud, let's trade the missiles. He has a story written about it. This is how I closed that chapter. He has a story written about Stevenson in which he has him buried as a man advocating a Munich, the one guy that advocated what actually happened. Now, if you think it's okay for the president to come around eyeball to eyeball and the other guy blinked, if you think this is the way it's played, the most frightening crisis of our time, to come away with the notion that the way you negotiate with the Russian bear is you grind his nose in the dirt, you draw a line in the Caribbean, you say to the Khrushchev, don't cross this line, get your missiles out of here, I'm giving you nothing in back except a pledge of no invasion. And if you think the Russian goes back with his tail between his legs, that's the model for negotiation. We come out with the missile crisis. And it's not what happened.
I'll tell you what I think.
It's not what happened. It wasn't. If that's okay with you, we're in different worlds.
We're not in different worlds, and you know better. I do believe that if you look at it, it was a successfully managed crisis.
That he may have made himself is the point.
Well, okay, but now you're going back to the fact, and we can go endless on this, and we could do a whole show on this, and it's worth doing, actually. But
I disagree. I don't think it's successfully managed if you tell a lie to the world about what you've done. If you negotiate a compromise that's a good compromise, that's explicable to the world.
You admired him for having the back channel. You've already said you did. You admired the president for having a back channel to Moscow.
Totally prudent in the case of
if you have a back channel, it's so you can make deals and you can have a relationship and you can communicate and work this thing out. Right?
It doesn't mean that you leave a legacy that you didn't have to leave. Okay. That's all. You have to tell the truth about foreign policy. You simply do. I think when you have an agreement like this, when you're on the edge of war and you don't say what the reality is, how you resolved it, you're telling the future generations of the world, the next presidents, the only way you negotiate is you've got to rub their nose in it. That's very dangerous. And let me say one more thing. Right. If it had been as serious as I'm not sure the Russians, I'm not sure there's a whole nother level to this. Who had the call? How did he structure it? Who had to make the decision not to go to World War III? How did he structure it? Who had to stop his ships?
Khrushchev.
Right. And do you really want that in a president, that he structures it so the other guy has to make the decision who's going to go to war? Wow. I don't think it's good management at all. And I'm sorry, I don't. That's what I write.
Okay, I think they successfully managed that crisis. You and I could differ over that because you look at it and the thing speaks for itself. They turned the ships back and it worked.
I think we're looking at a man who, in this case,
what? In this case, but nobody who was at that table, Si.
What table?
The table in which they were in the Oval Office when they were considering what to do. Nobody who was around there, whether it is McNamara, whether it is Bobby Kennedy, of course not, the members of the Joint Chiefs, all the people who were around there, whoever was there, I forget all the people that were there. No one is stepping forward, interviewed by you, saying the President of the United States was reckless during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Am I correct?
I think that's an overstatement to say.
Somebody is stepping forward to say, we screwed it up, Si, but we blew it, the President was reckless, and you were right.
You're throwing the line reckless for a part of it. The recklessness for me was creating the crisis, not telling the truth, dealing with a group that doesn't know the whole story, leaving it so the other guy has to make the call. If the world's not going to end, it's going to be because Khrushchev makes a decision not to go all the way, which I think Jack Kennedy ultimately understood all along.
He ultimately understood what?
I would guess that there's more to this whole crisis. We're going to find out more. The Soviet archives, by the way, I would guess that Kennedy probably had to have some understanding what he was going to do.
Let me just go down this line with you.
Sure.
And let me just say one thing. I mean, you're not in different worlds. I'm out to get at Seymour Hersh, who spent 5 years looking into this president's life, and who is a brilliant investigative reporter, and who has won a Pulitzer Prize, and who's admired by many, many of us who are in the same profession. We're in the same profession. We're in the same place. So I don't want to be any misunderstanding here as I try to find out where you're coming from. Sure. Having said that, what is it about this president, beyond style, beyond glamour, that you admire the most?
Jack Kennedy.
You said intelligent, so we got that on the record, too.
There was something about him that was overwhelmingly appealing. As I said, I'm sure if I had been working for him, I would have admired him as much as the people that did. There was something I wouldn't have known as much.
Take a look at Richard Reeves' book on decision-making at the White House. He comes away with a favorable look at this president as a decision-maker in the Oval Office, does it not?
This is a man who, at the end of his life, left us with a legacy in Vietnam. This is a man who authorized the first use of napalm in Vietnam, the first use of defoliants. He authorized Americans to begin flying airplanes. If you hadn't had the escalation Lyndon Johnson had from 17,000 to 550,000 in bombing, you would see a steady progression in Vietnam, although I don't think he believed in the war. Like McNamara's last book, if you remember, where McNamara acknowledged, and I think it's in retrospect it was called. Yeah. But so, I think a president has to operate from certain fundamental principles. One of them is we assume the president is not going to put us into a war he doesn't believe in. And whatever you can say about Lyndon Johnson, who did terribly on the war, who I couldn't stand on the war, he believed in it, enough so that he didn't run again.
Well, I don't know that he believed in it in the end. I mean, I think he had huge doubts about that war.
But he still, in the end, he could have changed his mind on the end and fought for the nomination. Instead, he walked away. He let it go. And Nixon, whatever you think about Nixon, and I'm one of those people who love to hate Nixon, he did Cambodia, all those things that were damaging to him. Yeah. I think he had a conviction. I think it was the wrong one, a totally wrong one. At least there was a conviction.
As to how to end the war.
I'm not sure, I disagree with it. I'm not sure what Jack Kennedy really believed about anything, if you want to know something. I'm really not. He gave a wonderful speech at the American University speech on disarmament, on getting along with the Russians. I think June the 10th, something like that, 1963. And then 2 weeks later, he's in Berlin giving the Ich bin ein Berliner speech, the most rigid Cold War speech. So where was he in all this? I'm not sure. I mean, look, politicians say different things at different times.
What was wrong with that speech? I didn't quite understand what was wrong with that speech.
Nothing.
I am a Berliner.
It was a wonderful,
not?
dramatic speech. It just came 2 weeks after he'd given a speech talking about, having to coexist. It's just different audience, different speech.
But those aren't necessarily opposite ideas, are they? I'm a Berliner because of the bravery of you people who stand here with you. On the other hand, you're saying, we want to end the Cold War.
The place to give a speech ending the Cold War, it seems to me, would have been in Berlin.
Let me come to this. You have received some criticism. You have been honored by the profession. You've gotten a Pulitzer Prize, and you've written books that have been bestsellers. You have been the gamut, and now this work will be on ABC television on Thursday night. When a fellow reporter says this, tell me what you say. It is an astonishing spectacle, this book. In his mad zeal to destroy Camelot, to raise it down, dance on the rubble, and sow salt on the ground where it stood, Hersh has, with precision and method, disassembled and obliterated his own career and reputation.
You mean, you're talking about the review of
Gary Wills in the New York Review.
I'm sorry I wrote about something he obviously, what can I say? He's entitled to say what he wants. I don't think that's at all right. I think that's, that's a pretty intemperate review, pretty angry tone of voice. This is a review that also says, Charlie, what's in here good, he says. Is there nothing good in this book? Practically nothing. And let me read you the next line. Hersh does make a good case that attitudes towards assassination were more casual in the CIA and the White House than people have realized. That's just a little throw aside. Oh, yes, I do make a case that attitudes towards assassination were a little more casual. Well, I think you could write a whole review about that line, too, rather than some of the other things. So, Charlie, let me tell you something about the press.
Right.
I'll tell you what hard times were. In '69, I get Lieutenant Calley. I get an interview with Calley, and I go find his lawyer, and I get a copy of the charge sheet that says he killed 111 Oriental, I'll never forget that word, human beings. They rewrote it to get rid of that word. And I've been Gene McCarthy's press secretary, I've been an AP correspondent, I'd written for the New York Times, had a cover piece a couple weeks earlier, Life magazine I was doing a piece for. I spend 6 weeks, every major newspaper, Life magazine for whom I'd worked, the Saturday Evening Post, nobody will buy my story. I have to syndicate it myself. That's what I call a hard time.
And so do I.
Every day, I'm sitting there, and I've got a story about not only the boys who were doing the killing were as much victims as the people they killed, and I know that. That's how bad that war was, and I can't get it in print. And if you think that I'm going to worry about what I get now after that, this is nothing compared to that. That was really hard times. This is just a piece of cake as far as I'm concerned. I can live with this because I've got facts in there. I've got a point of view that's unpopular, but there are a lot of people there. You've got a TV show coming.
Right.
I think you have something to show from it, right?
I do.
People can see it for themselves.
Having said what you just did, is the Cy Hersh that everybody stood up to applaud, not when he began to say this is a story, but after it was there and after you, with all the courage and with all the energy, did what you did. in those difficult times. Is that the same reporter that's here in this book?
What do you think? I mean, well, of course. Why not?
Okay.
What would happen to me? Have I suddenly gone local?
I'm asking.
No, you bet. Of course. Categorically, yes.
Anything you would change about this book? What would you do different?
Well, I guess I'd put a different name, a different bio. You know, I think my name attracts so much heat. You know, I mean,
come
you
on.
know.
No,
I'm serious.
What would you do?
What would I do?
Write it under a pseudonym, anonymous.
Put it in white. No, I'm very proud of this book. Don't ask me that question because I'll tell you something, Charlie. I anticipated the heat. I started working with a wonderful friend, a great filmmaker named Mark Oppenhaus, a year and a half ago.
Right.
And one of the things I went to Mark about, I said, they're not going to believe it. They're not going to believe no matter how many times I quote it, no matter how accurately, it's going to be a storm. And I knew that. That's one reason. And I applaud ABC and I applaud Peter Jennings for having the guts to go ahead and put this on because it's in-your-face journalism. You can see for yourself. These are people talking. I'm not inventing it. It's very tough stuff. We have to deal with the reality and not the myth. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I come down so hard, but I do.
And what is it you think is at issue here? It is that this is a president who has so many people, you know, who've been at what? I mean,
this is a manipulative...
What is it you've touched?
Hey, look, Charlie, guess what? I come from the old school where I'm first generation. My parents were born in the old country. I love my country. The government of the United States can come to me and say, hey, we're going to take your oldest born son and train him in the art of committing mass murder in the name of democracy. And I say, okay, for the commonweal, it's good. And I don't want my children to lie to me. I don't lie to my children. And if you don't think I should hold the highest ranking people to the same standard, that's what I've always done that as a journalist. And when somebody says to me, as you did there, you said, oh, Cy, nobody tells the truth about nuclear negotiations. My eye.
No, don't twist mine.
Well,
Cy,
that's
come on.
what you said. You said every president did that.
I said no. What I said is that every president who is in the White House doesn't tell every person sitting at the table everything that he knows and everything he's doing. That's what I said.
Charlie, it seems to me if you have a compromise on it to settle a nuclear dispute...
That's true. I mean, you sit there and you don't say, well, I know,
Charlie,
for example, that the CIA is doing this, and I'm simply not putting it on this table right now.
Charlie, the issue for me is, do I hold him to the highest possible standard? If he lies about events... The Pentagon Papers for me were shocking, not because of Lyndon Johnson. When I read the Pentagon Papers that Dan Ellsberg released through Dan Ellsberg through the New York Times, when I read those papers, everybody jumped on Lyndon Johnson. I saw Jack Kennedy in there. I saw some words I hadn't seen connected to his name: nation building, counterinsurgency, strategic Hamlet, fortified Hamlet. A lot of terror tactics in that. So it seems to me my job is to hold these guys to the highest possible standard, the same standards I hold myself, I hold you. And it seems to me that if I say, yeah, presidents don't always tell the truth. I'm not talking about what you just said, but nuclear negotiation, we resolve something in secret with the world. I'm going to claim a victory. It's going to be my greatest day, eyeball to eyeball, and the other guy blinked, when in truth it was a compromise, a rational, good compromise. But I don't really have the courage to tell the world I compromised. I don't want to do that. I think there's something wrong with that. I think it's very dangerous. I think it's very cynical. I think that this guy, and particularly his brother, after his death, Robert Kennedy, this stuff was so bad that Robert Kennedy could not even dare to avenge his brother's death. He couldn't dare tell the Warren Commission about Judy Campbell Exner, about Giancana. He couldn't dare to tell the truth because he would begin to unravel the string. I think Camelot was a stroke of genius by Jacqueline Kennedy. I think she couldn't dare to have the secret out. You begin to know what really went on, it'd be pretty bad. It'd be pretty bad. So I think I'm maintaining the standards that I maintain for myself, which is I'm going to tell it. I make blood enemies with it. That's the way it goes.
Do you think that all those people, just take those people who were in the cabinet, and his National Security Advisor, George Bundy, Douglas Dillon, Dean Rusk, Robert McNamara, down the line, that they knew the story of Jack Kennedy? Or were they blinded by something else? Arthur Schlesinger, who's going to be on this program.
They were in love with him.
Okay, so they were in love with him what? They were blinded, they didn't see it, they didn't know.
Here's the way it played, it seems to me, and I can speculate on this. Here's the way it played. Jack Kennedy professed to be tough. if he negotiated in the back channel with the Russians, as he did in the Berlin Wall and in the missile crisis, which I applaud, he didn't tell many people about it. Instead, Bobby Kennedy's talking in the fall of '61 about going to nuclear war. Literally, in the New York Times, gave an interview in which he said, "We're ready to use the nuclear weapons," which I don't think he ever was. So I think he professed a toughness. I think very few people really knew Jack Kennedy. The word he's used is compartmentalized. For a lot of reasons coming out of his childhood. He was a very sick kid.
Women said that. You put him in a compartment. If you in fact were a girlfriend, you were in a compartment you never got out of.
And a lot of people were compartmentalized. He had friends he only saw certain ways. And so I think everybody saw his toughness and played to it. In the fall of '61, every single advisor, wait, Charlie, let me finish this. Every single advisor in the Kennedy government, McGeorge, Bundy, Russ, they all recommended putting troops, hundreds of thousands of troops, a lot of troops, into Vietnam. And Jack Kennedy said no because he was too smart to do that.
How did all these people, what did they think? These admirable people, not in a total sense, but Dean Rusk, who comes there, George Bundy, I mean, these people, did they know? Did they see the same man you saw but tended to overlook it because of glamour, because of intelligence, because they were in the White House?
Well, I think Dean Rusk saw more than most. I think there was a lot of disappointment. There was stuff he did not write in his biography. The bottom line is I think Jack Kennedy had one person that knew everything. It was Robert.
Everything.
Everything. I think Robert Kennedy knew everything. And by the way, there's a wonderful irony. In the end of his life, what is Jack Kennedy trying to do with the president of South Vietnam, Diem, who was as close to his brother Nhu, the very much anti-American? Jack Kennedy wanted to separate those two. I mean, the notion that he couldn't see how those two, he couldn't separate it any more than he and his brother could be separated. I think Bobby was the one person who truly understood everything. He was the guy that did all the heavy lifting when it came to protecting him from the mob, and all those stories I write so much about with a lot of new witnesses. I don't think you can get to this book very easily because there's a lot of people that have to be looked at. I think it's very hard to take. I think it's such a dark view.
It is stunning in terms of the disclosures you make to imagine the President of the United States doing some of these things.
Well, does that mean that he didn't do it? Or
no, I'm not saying, I'm just saying it's stunning. No, but I think...
I agree.
It's stunning.
It's, let me show you. Watch Peter Jennings on Thursday. You'll be amazed at that.
Okay, my point is that we can't detail all the things. For example, I mean, having, as you suggest, from Judith Exner, that she was carrying money from the President of the United States as his girlfriend to Sam Giancana, the mob boss in Chicago, and serving as a kind of conduit back and forth between the two of them. Others look at that, and we're running way out of time here, and they say, that's beyond recklessness, that's stupid.
Let me go on. No, it's not. Let me give you a reason. She's in love with him. She's totally loyal. Let me tell you why that story's in the book, by the way. I'm doing a lot of interviewing. I'm seeing everybody. There's a guy named Marty Underwood. Right. Martin Underwood became Lyndon Johnson's chief advancement, well known in the Johnson White House. In 1960, he was loaned by Mayor Daley to the campaign. It's a story he tells me on the record. In April of 1960, Kenny O'Donnell calls him during the campaign and says, I want you to take the train. He's in Washington overnight. I quote him as saying this. He lives in Baltimore. Right. Follow her. There's a woman named Judy Exner. I want you to get on. Just ride in the compartment with her. Right. And when he delivers the money, he watched her deliver a bag. He didn't know what was in it. She said it was money. All I can do is quote what she said. But he saw her deliver a bag to Sam Giancana and said, what the hell is this? Went on. I asked him about it 35 years later, and he tells me about it. Right. That helps me with that story. I liked Judy Campbell Exner. I'll take the heat on it. I think... Even
though she changed her story, you believe what she says now.
She did some things for me. She told me people she was telling the story to. In 1962 and 63, she did talk. I went to see her finally. She was very reluctant to see me. And I said, the only way I'm going to believe you is I want to know you had to tell somebody. Everybody talks. She gave me 2 people she talked to, both of whom confirmed stuff. She introduced me... Well, it doesn't matter. The bottom line is, she told me some things that... One of the things I know categorically, I make a big issue on in this book, it's a subtle issue, Jack Kennedy, before he got into office, before he took the presidency, after the election, before his inauguration, began the wheel and deal on the assassination business. I write that very hard, based on some unpublished documents I've gotten from people in the Senate Intelligence Committee.
Assassination business.
Just lining up a capability, executive action. He started talking about it before the presidency. And she tells me, absolutely not knowing anything about dates, the first time she moves paper to Sam Giancana is before the inauguration. I like that. It's a nice little factoid. Anyway, I liked her.
All right, let me tell you, answer me this.
Sure.
What did you fight to the end to get in this book? You couldn't get in this book because your lawyers
Little
Brown's lawyers said, no way, Hersh. Nothing. Nothing.
Nothing.
You had no big story you couldn't get in here because you couldn't find somebody to confirm the fact that would not have put you at risk.
I'll tell you the rule. For example, I talked to Richard Helms, and he wouldn't go on the record, so I didn't use anything for him.
Yeah.
There were only a few people off the record. There's a woman who had an affair with him. I used off the record.
Is this a Radcliffe person? Or?
Yeah, a very bright woman, very insightful.
Lives here in New York? Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not going to talk about where she is. I don't know what I said. I forgot what I said in the book. But anyway, the bottom line is that it doesn't matter, Charlie.
No, I'm just saying you can't remember sometimes what's in the book and what's not. Anybody.
You bet. Hey, Charlie, I can't remember my phone number sometimes.
Right,
anyway, the point is that a lot of good stuff, a lot of good anecdotal stuff, didn't get in because people wouldn't go on the record. I stuck to people on the record. There was only a few little odds and ends.
Then there's this criticism.
That I went on the record? What?
No, no, you've heard it before. It is that Sy heard, look, we've heard all this stuff before. Sy found somebody who would talk, and that's what he did here. But all these stories and most of this stuff has been out there and been talked about before. You say what?
The best criticism I had about that line was he's got the little people to talk. You bet. That's the way I work. I like the bottom up. He got the little people that we haven't heard from before. You're going to see people.
So the achievement here is the fact that you took stuff that has been heard before and found somebody to either confirm it or deny it. That's the story of this book for you.
The achievement here is summed up quite nicely. I like that. That's as good as I could have had my mother write it for me, Charlie, is that I did the story from the bottom up. The achievement is that we all heard rumors about him and the mob. To get Tina Sinatra to talk to me about it on the record and talk on film about what her father did. And I was criticized, one of the early criticisms was secondhand.
Yeah.
Wow, I'll take secondhand Tina Sinatra any day. Please give me Tina Sinatra secondhand. She's bright, she's articulate, she knew what she was doing.
She's the daughter of Frank.
She's the daughter of Frank, and she did a lot of work with Frank. And by the way, I was told to get her, to look her up by Frank's lawyer, a guy named Mickey Rudin, a very smart lawyer. He said, you want to know what you have to know? Find her. If she'll talk, you've got the story.
How do you get them to talk?
Oh, Charlie, come on. If I had a buck and put it in a bottle, I'd sell it for a lot of money. Charlie, you know what? You know what it is? Let me tell you the story. The story is I get them to talk because as soon as they open the door, I jump on them with my teeth and get them by the artery, right? That's the story. I gang up on them.
No, it's not true. How do you do it?
You read before you write, Charlie. You got to read before you write. So I go through documents. I go through papers. That's what I do. I spent a year reading on this damn book. A year. That's a lot of time for reporters sitting on my butt reading. So if you read before you write and you know what you're talking about, and you also, believe it or not, you play it totally straight. I told you a lot of people talked to me that weren't on the record. I didn't use the thing. And that's what I lost. But the publisher never saw that. Some wonderful stories I lost.
Sy Hersh, The Dark Side of Camelot. Take a look at this. ABC television tomorrow night. We have not talked about the fact that there was a Marilyn Monroe thing. I just want to refer to it 1 second.
Well,
there was a.
Let me talk about it.
Okay, talk about it.
I've been criticized all my career, Charlie, for what I wrote. When Me Lie and stuff is the first time I was ever taken to task for what I thought. I didn't write it. I found it. And Charlie, the day I don't chase a tip that Marilyn Monroe
That's
is black.
not the issue, and you know it.
Well, of course it is.
It is not. It's not whether you chased it. The question is whether at some point you should have said look, all these red flags. The person said he was never in the room. That ought to be some indication to me
Charlie,
that I'm on to a...
Charlie, let me tell you what the point is, just so you know what the facts are. There's been a lot written about it, and a lot of people write without talking to me about it. Let me just tell you what the story is, as far as that goes. The story is very simply that I didn't care what people said to me because that's just an opinion. I had plenty of opinions that it was true from some of the same people that's saying it's not. So you have that. That's one of the facts of the world. People will tell different things after it looks bad. I cared about finding it empirically. I and Mark Oppenhaus, Lancer Productions, who did this documentary, we spent months trying to find this damn... There was supposed to be a side agreement with Jack Kennedy, a trust fund. We tried to find the trust fund. We broke into all kinds of banks to get into trust funds. We got into some credible access. Off-the-record access. We couldn't find the trust fund, and we did a lot of work on Marilyn Monroe. Ended up concluding it was a tremendous fight between I and Mark. We used to have tremendous fights about it.
Ended up concluding
that she never would have been able to blackmail him. She loved him too much. And so from that point on, that's early this year.
Did you come to that conclusion before or after ABC News came to that conclusion?
Way before. Come on. Way before. And let me set the record straight on that. We brought that conclusion to ABC News. That is a fact. Now, ABC News did finance the forensic investigation. They did find it. So from their point of view, ABC's point of view, they financed it, they found it. But then we're talking, the bottom line is, in the spring of this year, I guess. Am I right, this year still? Yes.
It's still
97. In the spring of 97, by May, we got the first indication there was a real problem with the papers. We had to get a second opinion. You can't, this is all being argued by lawyers still now. Are they good, are they not good? You know, people, some...
You don't have any doubt that these are bad papers, come on.
Oh, no, but 60 Minutes just did a show a couple of weeks ago, and I will tell you right now that we understood that for weeks before that, some of the people, Don Hewitt, thought they may have been good, too. I just saw a reporter at lunch, a guy named Zoglin from Time Magazine, that said there was a moment when he thought they could have been good, even after I said they weren't good. They're beautiful documents. The bottom line is, as soon as we got a second opinion, it was over. That was by July of 1997. My publisher, I'm telling you what is a fact, Little Brown never saw that chapter of Monroe. It never got to her. It was gone a long time ago. That is a fact.
Never got to you, editor.
But hey, you know...
And it's not in the television.
Listen, you know what? Live by the sword, die by the sword, you know? I mean, I took a lot of heat for it. I took a lot of heat for... And what you're really saying to me, Cy, you should have, you know... The bottom line is it's not in the book. I didn't print it. It didn't get close to being printed. Right. We made it public. The U.S. Attorney's now doing an investigation. There was some talk about going to the FBI. We decided, let's put it out on ABC and let it fall where it falls. We'll take... If there's a hit, we took a hit. Big, you know, I'm sorry about it. I wish it didn't happen. But I did nothing that wasn't consistent with, as far as I'm concerned, what an investigative journalist does. A lot of times, Charlie, we go after stories, and we
you
can't
see it to the end. And no matter how much the evidence seems to be piling up on one side, you keep going. At some point, though, you say, wait a minute.
Well, I've
got to stop, and I got to look at this evidence, and this is not, this dog don't hunt.
Yeah, but Charlie, what else did we do? That's exactly what we did.
All right. The Dark Side of Camelot, Seymour M. Hersh, here, The Dangerous World, The Kennedy Years, airs Thursday at 8 p.m. on ABC. Here is an excerpt from that broadcast.
Many people came to the White House who did not know who they were. He had a tendency to surround himself with ladies sometimes that were a little worrisome.
These women were of questionable character.
Most of the other Secret Service agents and myself were worried about the fact that the Russians or communists or any people like that could bring in a ringer, so to speak.
We didn't know if these women were carrying listening devices, if they had syringes that carried some type of poison, or if they had Pentax cameras that would photograph the president for blackmail.
Possibility of blackmail and things like that are astounding. Who knows? I never knew the name of one of the outsiders.
Cy Hersh, again, The Dark Side of Camelot. The piece on ABC News will be on Thursday night. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Stay with us.